Hello, everyone. For the ones that have just trickled in, my name is Christina Espiritu from Pacific Asian Consortium and Employment, or PACE, and you are in the workshop called Understanding Business Grants. I've been doing this every month for the past several months, and I know that most of you here are in business or in corporations, for-profit businesses, but some of you are also in nonprofit. So welcome to you as well. And if you are in nonprofit, reach out to me later on. I know that these are business grants, and then I send out a grant list after this. But yes, if you are doing something in a nonprofit, make sure to reach out to me as well later on. Okay, and we're gonna get started. Again, I am from PACE, Pacific Asian Consortium and Employment, and PACE has been around since the 70s, but the department that we are in, which is the Business Development Center, has been around since 1993. And since then, we have provided business training, technical assistance, one-on-one counseling, and access to capital to many, many men and women, entrepreneurs in Southern California. So aside from being an SBA microloan intermediary, we're also a certified community development financial institution, which means that we can also do loans. So we do SBA and non-SBA loans. We are able to do that through internal loans, but then we also have a network of partners of banks and financial institutions. So we also do community development entity and an official CalCap lender, and we also house the award-winning Women's Business Center. Oh, not able to hear sound. Okay, I just want to make sure. Are you able to hear me? Okay. Please, if you can put on the chat. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Okay, so I think one has said that you can't hear me. So if you wanna maybe log on and off, perfect, awesome. Okay, thanks. Thanks, guys. There you go. There you go. And so just a little bit of background about the other programs that we have. So we also have the Women's Business Center, which is part of the Small Business Administration, or SBA. And we also provide in-depth business services to men and women entrepreneurs, all the way from startups up to established business owners, and a representative number of whom are socially and economically disadvantaged. And then I'm also part of it's called the MBDA program, which is the Minority Business Development Agency, which is a part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. So through that, we work with a different oh, we provide three different services. One is providing access to capital, where we connect to private lenders, banks, and investors. We also provide access to contracts, assisting with contract and procurement opportunities. And the last one is providing access to markets, which is positioning to expand client base and operations to global markets. So the two main programs that I talked about, whether it's the SBA or the MBDA, we provide free of charge to our clients. And we get this because of different grants that we have, either through the MBDA or SBA. And then just a table of contents. We're going to go through some housekeeping items, the types of grants, best practices, exploring available grants, and then we'll have a little bit of Q&A. Just have a couple of housekeeping items. So please make sure that you mute yourself while the presentation is going on. Use the chat function, which some of you have been using already, and your raise hand features to participate. So in the chat function, if you can put your name, your business, and then the industry that you're in, that would be great. So then we can get to know you, and then I can get to know what industry that you're in. So then if there's anything specific that I see, I'll make sure that I actually mention it. So thank you. Yeah, because there's some, as you'll see later on, there's some grants that are specific to an industry. So if I know the composition of the audience, then I can refer to specific grants that I may know. Okay, yeah. So thank you, Nina. Thank you, Terry. Okay, nonprofit. Yes. So as I said, even though this says it's understanding business grants, some of them will also pertain to nonprofit grants. So yes, so nonprofit, intellectual property, health, personal care. So thank you. Yes, and then if you can't hear the speakers, make sure your computer audio is turned on. I think someone had found that out already. And then hold questions as much as possible until the appropriate time. So if you have, yeah, you can either ask questions on the chat or you can go on the yeah, on the chat function, the Q&A function, or you can just raise your hand and then hopefully, I'll try to answer your questions as much as I can. And then please use the chat, as I said, please use the chat to introduce yourself and then to post questions. And later on, if you decide that you had a question I didn't answer or you had additional questions that you didn't think of, you can just email me at here at the bottom. So cespiritu@pacela.org. Okay, so thank you. I think, yeah, so thank you. I'm just looking at some of the people who are putting their information in the chat. Seems like we're pretty well represented. I see wellness, apparel, and services, but so far I think I see um, a representative number of products and services. Okay. Yes. Okay. So sorry about that. Just a type of grant. So first, a table of contents. First are what are the types of grants that I typically see in for business grants. So first are government grants, industry-specific grants, R&D grants, and demographic-specific grants. So first, what are government grants? So government grants are the ones offered by the local, state, or federal government to support various aspects of business development. So some of you may have attended this webinar before, or you may be new, but you have heard me talk about some types of grants that are by the government. One of them is offered by the city, by let's say City of LA, which is where I'm located. City of LA, there's one called the LA Economic Opportunity Grant. There's also some that are given by the state. So it's California. There was a California grant that was given out a couple years ago. Yeah, so on the chat, please chime in and see if whether you've known of any grants that are in your local level, let's say in your city, for example. At one point there was one that was by the city of Santa Ana. So there was one city of Santa Ana, Irvine, city of Los Angeles. Yeah, so please feel free to chime in on the chat if you've ever gotten a grant or know of grants that are in by the government. Please share. So then there are also some industry-specific grants. So industry-specific grants are the ones that are tailored to businesses in particular industries like technology, agricultural, or renewable energy. So I think there may have been some people who are in the food industry. There are grants at some point that were given out by DoorDash, and then also by the Restaurant Association. And then I have seen some grants that are specific to so some that are in food. I've seen some that are for retail stores. For example, at one point, Etsy, Etsy.com, they had some grants for those who are using their platform, and then also eBay. So I've seen grants given out by eBay or also by Amazon. Yes. So then my suggestion on those ones would be if you belong to a specific industry is to check the industry trade association that you're in and see if there are any grants that are specific to you. And then the third one that I see are R&D grants, and those are the ones that are aimed at fostering innovation and technological advancements. So that grant that I see quite often would be the SBIR grant that is given out by the SBA. So it's SBIR stands for Small Business innovation and research grant. So the example that I always give, and if you've attended this workshop before, the SBIR grants are for those products or services that are innovative or unique. And so they take products or services that have some sort of commercial application later on. So, for example, I have a Roomba, or like one of those um like robot vacuum cleaners. But that was originally an application that was based on an SBI grant. The original technology for that one was designed for sweeping landmines. So landmines as in a landfill, right? And then they were able to actually change it. So then the application then said, you know what? Instead of sweeping landmines, we can actually sweep the floors and rugs of households. So that's how the Roomba technology came about. Yeah, pretty interesting, right? Yeah, and the last type of grant that I often see are demographic specific grants, and those are the ones that are tailored to a specific demographic, like ethnicity, gender, veteran status, or location. So these ones you may be familiar with. For example, Tory Burch, which is a pretty famous retail brand, has a Tory Burch grant that they always give out. Or for women. And then also, I think it was called Freed Fellowship. They also give out women grants for for women entrepreneurs or women-owned businesses. So they also have a lot that are based on ethnicity and gender, and then also location, which kind of coincides with the ones that are for government. And then just a couple of best practice. So I guess before I go on, are there any questions on the four things that I've said, the types of grants? And I'm just going to give a couple seconds if I see any on the chat. If not, I am just gonna proceed. Okay, I don't see any questions. So, okay. So now that we know the types of grants, right? So we know that there are four types of grants. Now we can go into the best practices on how to actually apply, all the way from applying to these grants to actually looking for them. Where do you find them, right? Couple things would be, first is, how do you find them? That's the first question. First is, where do you do your research? So doing your research leads to looking for grants that align with your business's industry goals and then the location. So there are various sources, including federal agencies, private organizations, and foundations. So the ones that are foundations actually would be more pertinent to those ones that are nonprofit. So maybe there are some foundations that give business grants, but I see foundations like family foundations that cater more to nonprofit. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about nonprofits, since I see that a few of you are in the nonprofit world. So for example, like some certain, the one that I can kind of think of is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that is a type of family foundation. And then also most recently that I have known of is the foundation that is started by uh by Jeff Bezos's wife. I can't remember her name. However, she gave out a few numerous $1 million grants, and I believe where I am in Orange County, one or two organizations actually had gotten that grant. So yes, so first is doing your research, right? So whether you're in the nonprofit or for-profit world, it's looking at different agencies, private organizations, and foundations, as I've mentioned. So first one would be government websites. As I mentioned earlier, that some of the biggest type of grants are the ones that are given by the government. So whether you're in the city, state, county, or the federal level. So first thing of doing your research is checking government websites at the different levels of government for grant opportunities. So that includes agencies like the SBA, which we talked about. They have the SBIR grant that I'd spoken about earlier. And so they often provide resources and information on other available grants. The other one that I see would be looking at private foundations, which is what we talked about earlier. Private foundations offer grants, some of them to businesses, particularly those focused on specific industries, causes, or regions. So they may be researching foundations that are relevant to your business and then exploring their grant programs. And so one thing um I suggest with this one is that the big companies like Amazon or eBay or Walmart often have private foundations that are attached to them. So if you go to, let's say, like Walmart.com, right? Obviously, you're not gonna go see the foundation. However, if you look down below on the footer of the website, is you'll often see something that's called corporate or corporate giving. And so that one often talks about the private foundations that they're a part of. And then when you look at that one, they'll usually have a schedule of application periods and then also the causes that they support. So that's all. So that's a good way to do your research on where you can find those types of grants. And then the other ones, more ways in order to do your research would be to look at corporate grants. So corporate grant programs, so looking at those, and this one actually kind of goes hand in hand with the private foundations. So these are corporations that offer grant programs as part of their corporate social responsibility initiatives or to support businesses that are aligned with their mission or industry. So as I said earlier, so looking at the corporate websites and community outreach programs for potential opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, Walmart is one of them. eBay would be one of them. Etsy would be one of them. Target has a foundation, right? So you can look at for corporate grant programs and also nonprofit opportunities as well. And then the other one that I also recommend doing a research on would be the industry associations. So those are the ones that are associated with a trade group or an association that is specific to your industry. So for example, there is a big restaurant industry association, healthcare would be another one, retail. So all the different major industries would have an associated with them. So make sure that you check out or even join relevant associations that can provide access to these types of opportunities. And then the other way to do your research would be looking at the economic development agencies. So those are the ones, for example, like PACE, right? Our agency, Chambers of Commerce, or also business development organizations in your area. They may offer grants or be aware of local grant opportunities. So at this moment, I'm going to pause and see and ask you a question in the chat. How many of you have done these types of research before, and whether you found something that you've applied to? So whether you've done your research, whether you found a government grant or something that has to do with your industry, or even at your local chamber of commerce. Yes, please chime in and let me know if you actually had success in finding grants using these types of means. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, great. Okay, yes, you've identified a couple of agencies but haven't applied yet. Yes. So so for example, um like in Terry, I don't know where you are, like what city you're in, but honestly, it's even simply looking at where your location is, what city you're in, the county that you live in. Those could be a gold mine because a lot of times people don't know about them and then people don't apply, right? So I would say they could be a low-hanging fruit. Um, so then now that you've done your research, is the second one is really understanding your eligibility criteria. Does your business meet all the eligibility requirements before applying? So they can include factors like your business size, your industry, your location, and the purpose of the grant. So just let's talk about this a little bit more. So for example, as I said, they can be very specific, right? For example, we have one that's a PACE grant, and it is a very specific district that is located in LA County. And why would they do that? It's because they or whoever the funder is or the giving the grant, they usually have some sort of public policy purpose, and it would be to develop wherever they are economically, so the location that they're in. So, for example, with that grant, I think we're on our, I would say about fourth or fifth iteration. So we've given out grants, and then we've also gotten grants from the funders that many times. So with that one, what I do after this webinar is I send out to those who attend, I send out a list of new grants. And so that's one of the grants I also include. So make sure if you are in LA and in that specific district, you kind of follow the directions and see if you're eligible or not. So then once you find out if you meet all the eligibility requirements, I also I'll check and see if you look at the funding amount, and see, first of all, if it's even worth it for you to apply, right? Because a lot of these grants may take a lot of time. And so if it takes a lot of effort and resources on your time, that's it even worth it for the funding amount that you have, that you're going to be able to get, right? So I think that's part of the return on investment that you have to look at when you're applying for some of these grants. Oh, okay. So now, actually, and I'm gonna pause right now because I saw some interesting questions on the chat. So, is there a tool or an AI prompt that can help you scan the grant market to find suitable grants aligned to your business type? Interestingly enough, I had done an AI prompt on just like WhatsApp, and what they give you is very general. So they will give you some of them, but I don't think it's, and maybe that it's a version I have because I didn't have the free version, but they will give you some, but they're very top level, and they'll say, oh, okay, go to your SBA, go to sba.gov and look for grants. So like the last time I checked, which is a couple months ago, they didn't really have anything very, very specific. Question, what's the right attitude to approach grants? What could be our different expectations while applying for grants? So I always say that um, once you I when you approach grants, I always look at what is, because you're all busy entrepreneurs and business owners, right? So when you're approaching grants and applying for them, I always see what is the return on your investment when you're applying, because obviously it's going to take your time and your resources, most of your time, right, to apply for this. And so if you think the amount is worth it enough for you to take X amount of time, then yes, then go for it, right? Because there are some, and then what I see are that the grants that are more based on government, like the government grants, seem to have less competition, and the example that I will give is the LA Economic Opportunity Grant, which was the last iteration was last year, and they had initially, like they had the grant open, and then they initially had it close in February. And then they extended it in March, and then they extended it to May. And so the only reason why I can think of why they're actually extending it is because they just didn't have enough applications, right? And because I think those ones are not heavily marketed. The ones that are marketed are the ones we always talk about. So for example, I know that people have applied to the Verizon grant many, many times. And I know a lot of people that haven't gotten it. So if you have applied for that grant and actually had gotten it, I would love to know. So put in your chat if you've applied, and if you wanted to let me know or let us know if you actually got it or not, because many people, it seems like, have applied for it many different times, like more than once, and none of them, yeah, it seems like it's very hard to get, so which is the only thing I can think of is because it's very competitive. So yeah, so understanding the eligibility criteria, like, so then after you check the funding amount, it's really to pay attention to the application instructions and requirements. So make sure you submit the necessary documents and information accurately and on time. And so I'm going to pause here and say, okay, well, um, this seems to be it's simple, right? It's just common sense. However, it's really the simple ones that can actually make or break your application. Even let's say the formatting of it, or maybe not putting whatever they require, the budget or anything like that. So we'll talk more about that. But making sure that you submit the necessary documents, in whatever format they actually ask for it, and then make sure you do it on time. Okay. And then next one is like, so once you've seen the application, you think, okay, I'm gonna go for it, right? I'm eligible. The next step would be preparing a solid business plan. And so most grant applications actually require that you have a detailed business plan, outlining your objectives, your market analysis, strategies, and your projections. So making sure that your plan is well thought out and addresses all the necessary components. And then honestly, if at the very least, even if you're not applying for a grant, it's good to have a solid business plan anyway, right? And for those of you who have a plan already, then it actually makes your life easier, because then when you apply for your grant, then you can just use some of the parts, bits and pieces of your business plan in order to customize it to the grant that you're looking for or applying for. So with regards to the solid business plan, some of you may, this may be just review for you guys. So making sure that you've defined your business need or your project, making sure that you highlight your history, your achievements, and your expertise, highlighting the problem that your project addresses, your solution, and the potential impact. So this one may be not something that you have in your business plan, right? And then last one is clearly explaining why your project or your business needs the grant. So providing evidence of, if they ask for it, is providing evidence of some sort of demand or market research. So like now that you've seen, okay, this is what my business can do. This is how long we've been in business. This is what we've achieved. This is what we are good at. Um, and if there is a specific problem, so for example, if it's a restaurant grant, let's say it's from DoorDash, right? And if you know that what they're highlighting is to promote marketing or promote business, development in the restaurant industry, let's say for those ones that were affected by COVID, is making sure that you highlight how your project or your company can address the problem that they're having, and then the solution to it and the potential impact. So this one also counts also if you're a nonprofit, right? So if you're looking for a grant that is specific to a foundation, then this is also something that you want to take into account. And then also last one is, why do you need the money, right? So then now that you have this project or your business needs, why do you really need the grant? And then we'll talk more about that when we talk about the budget. Okay. Okay. So I'm looking at just a couple comments. Other than I'm not okay. So it says someone said that they haven't applied for grants because they haven't been encouraged. So this is what I would recommend, is that I don't know what industry or business you're in, but it doesn't hurt to just kind of look for grants every so often. I would say every few months or so, and see, because as you know, oh, this is for Verizon. Okay. Yes. So actually I have a specific tip for Verizon, based on someone who actually worked for the Verizon grant. So make sure you guys remind me of that one. Okay. Okay, so preparing a solid business plan. So other things is to making sure that you highlight the qualifications and experience of your team, and then what makes your project unique or innovative. So this one is actually even more pertinent when you're looking at the grants that are specific to the R&D, like R&D grant, right? The SBIR grant by the SBA. And then also communicating what the potential impact of your project or your business on the community or the industry. So this is also very pertinent for nonprofits. And then last one is create a compelling executive summary. So then once you've kind of gotten the bits and pieces of your solid business plan, I always recommend that people write your executive summary last, in order, because what the executive summary is to summarize all the different perspectives and different parts of it. So one thing you want to make sure is that it's cohesive and it really ties in all the different parts of your business plan. Okay. And let me just check. Oh, okay. So I was checking if there are more questions. Okay, and then now the next part is demonstrating your financial need. So this one kind of gets a little bit more about what we talked about earlier, which is clearly communicating why you would need the money, right? And so here, most grants will have you provide a detailed budget that clearly outlines how you'll use the grant funds. And so then it makes sure that it aligns with the grant program guidelines. So what does that mean? I'll talk about the the Verizon grant because that's the one I had seen fairly recently. So for example, that one, I think it was 10,000. So then it tells you, okay, for the $10,000, what are you going to be using the money for, right? So is it going to be for marketing? Is it going to be to hire someone? Is it going to be for rent? But it wants you to outline what you're going to be using the funds for. So this is very important later on what you'll find because a lot of grants will fund some expenses, but not all of them, right? So, admittedly, they won't fund travel expenses or maybe entertainment purposes. So first one is how do you demonstrate your financial need? And then making sure you have a successful grant application is really understand what the funder is looking for. And a couple things, whether it's we're looking for the content, right? So we're talking about the content, but also the template, like how it's presented. So it's really the presentation and then also the content. So first is looking at what format or template are they looking for, right? So that's what first we talked about. And this one pertains to budgeting. So the budget they'll say, okay, go and split this $10,000 and see how you're going to be spending it on. A lot of them will say, okay, do it in this format, in some sort of Excel format or some sort of template. So make sure you follow that one if they do have one, right? And then second is, are they looking for a budget for a specific program or a project, or is it your operating budget? So this one is also very important for a nonprofit. So for example, if you have, like the grant that you're looking for, and let's say, are they looking to fund your company, right? Or are they looking to fund a specific program? So for example, if you're a company that does let's say cybersecurity, but then you have a specific program that is within that one, are they looking to grant you money for that program, or are they looking to grant money for your company in general? So then that dictates whether you're budgeting for a program or a project or for your operating budget as a company. And then the other one to consider is what type of expenses are eligible. As I mentioned before, when you're doing your budget, they may say, okay, expenses that are related to rent are not eligible, or expenses related to subscriptions may not be eligible. So you just have to make sure that you read the fine print on the eligibility of that one. And then the other one would be, what time period are the expenses included? Are they for this year? Are they for the next 2 years? Right? So making sure you also know that. And then what level of detail are the funders looking for? Are they looking for, and then you can tell that by the template that they have. Are they looking for, a very detailed one? Are they looking for something that is more on top, right? Or more of an overview? Or maybe it's somewhere in the middle, but just making sure that you know what they're looking for. Tip number two, so making sure that you work with your partners on costs. So for example, if you have let's say if you're doing a project and then you have different partners, making sure that you consider both the indirect and direct costs and then the program versus operating costs. So the program versus operating costs we talked about already, right? Are you asking for a grant for your specific program? So let's talk about the one for the SBIR grant, for example. If they're looking to fund an innovative project, they may be looking for a budget for the program, right? Versus for your company. Because if your company has several different programs or projects, but you're only looking for a grant for one of them, then you have to make sure that the budget that you have demonstrates that one or looks into that one. And then we'll talk about direct and indirect costs in the next couple of slides. So, oh, there you go. The direct and indirect costs. So then this goes along with making sure that you know what expenses you're eligible for when you're looking at the budget. So direct costs really are the costs that are identified expenses that can be linked to a particular grant, contract, or project, right? So those are the ones that can, if you look at it, you say, okay, I know that this will directly impact my project, right? So the indirect ones, and I'll give you an example of what they are. And then indirect ones are those are the ones that are necessary just for the general operations of the organization, and also the conduct of activities that are performed, but they're not direct expenses. Okay. And then just to give you an example on that one, would be so the direct costs would be like salary and wages, your materials, equipment and tools, planning activities, training related costs, or even postage. So as you can see, those are the ones that are directly related to your project or program. And indirect costs are the ones that are indirect salaries. So what are those? So for example, if you're looking to fund a project, right, and the project has you have to build something. Let's say you have to build a house for low cost income, right? Let's say low income families. So then the salary that is directly related to building it would be the one that's indirect, but an indirect cost would be the ones, let's say marketing, because maybe marketing that program is not directly related to building the house. So you have to make sure that you kind of know what types of expenses you have, whether they're direct or indirect. Some other indirect ones would be depreciation and amortization, facility occupancy costs, your liability insurance, tax and accounting, and then rent and utilities. So some of them may be a fine line of, as I said, even the salaries, right? Because would they be directly associated with your project or program or not? So those are the ones that you really have to think about and consider. So the last one, or tip number 3, is making sure that your grant narrative aligns with your budget. And why is that? So for example, if you create a budget and then your budget has and I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say your budget is 10,000. So you put all your expenses down and then you put that, the story that you have, let's say you're a restaurant and then because of COVID, then, your expenses had risen up on some of them, right? Let's say your labor costs had risen up because of salary and then you needed more people. So then when you're doing your grant narrative, knowing that your budget and that the budget that you're looking for is 50% in labor, make sure you touch that in your narrative and say, well, why do you need the labor? Why do you need to, why is your grant, why is the grant that you're looking for, you wanted to do, spend it most on labor? So kind of, it's really crafting a story and making sure that your grant narrative aligns with your budget. So that's why it's really important to understand, to create the budget first and say, okay, how can I make a story around this, right? So with that said, before I go on, one thing we do with PACE is that we actually can look at your grants when you're applying for grants. If you are part of our client list or our clientele, we can actually look at your grant list and say, okay, and then review it. So then it's almost like a third person, unrelated party, reviewing your grant narrative, right? So that's just a little plug of what we do. And we offer our services free of charge. And the other one would be, once done that one, is to make sure that you gather all the supporting documents. And that says making sure that you include all relevant supporting documents, such as your financial statements, tax return, business licenses, or letters of recommendation to strengthen your application. So for example, this one goes along with the eligibility requirements. So for example, if their eligibility is that you make, and I've seen many of these, is that you make, let's say, $100,000 or less, right, in order to apply for this grant. So that's when you're going to need your tax return or your financial statement. So then this one, making sure that when you have your supporting documents, is that since if you plan on applying for numerous grants, I suggest kind of gathering all these documents in one place, either a Google Drive or some sort of cloud document. And this just so, especially with grants that have a short deadline, or the deadline is pretty soon, making sure that you have all the supporting documents ready. Good question. So this one, is it possible to get a grant for a specific project, even if my company is not a nonprofit? Yes. So I've seen this before. So for example, the example that I give is the SBIR grant, right? The one through the SBA. So that's for profits. That one, if you have, if you are, let's say, if you're a company that developed an engineering company and you wanted to get funded for a specific project, is that you can do a specific project budget, a budget for that one. Good question. So once you've gathered the supporting documents, it's really proofreading and reviewing it. Actually, this is where I should have told you about our services. So because you can, make sure you thoroughly proofread your application to ensure it's free of errors and clearly communicates your message. And then so have someone else review it to catch any overlooked mistakes or inconsistencies. And so for me, I've reviewed many grants, and then the errors that I usually see, the mistakes are typically on calculating the budget, and then also doing creating a story between the budget template and the narrative of the budget, right? So that's why I always make sure that when I'm reading the narrative first, when I do a grant application, I'll read the narrative first, and I'll say, okay, now I get a gist of the narrative. Then I'll look at the budget and say, okay, well, does the narrative really align with the budget? Does it make sense when you put them together? So those are the ones where it makes sense when you have someone else reviewing it and you're not, because when you're reviewing it yourself, you're so far attached to the application that you may not see the inconsistencies if there are any. So at this moment, we have a few we have several minutes for questions, but I'm gonna give you just my contact information here, if you wanted to reach out to me. So, yeah, so let me take any questions. So I'll have a few minutes. Let me see. Is it possible to get a grant for Oh, actually, that's one I had just seen. Oh, PDF format. I can try, but normally, what I do after this is I send out the grant list, which is more important for people. Every month I highlight what new grants are available, and then I update it. Mm, Okay. Oh, okay. So I think there was another question. I think this is a question about um, okay. Oh, okay. What about startup nonprofits without tax exemption? Okay. Great question. So actually, it's very hard to get a grant for a startup nonprofit, especially if you don't have a tax exemption yet, right? Which means that I'm assuming that a nonprofit also has different missions, right? There's a 501(c)(3), which is charitable, and then 501(c)(6), which is more for the chamber. So it's actually it's very difficult. I wouldn't say impossible but I just say it's very difficult to get a grant for a startup nonprofit, because usually what they want is they want to see that you're actually doing something that aligns with your mission and your purpose. So they want to see some activity. So let's say if your purpose is to, like, let's say, feed the homeless. What I suggest usually is that if that's your purpose, then do that for at least a year to show that you're dedicated to that purpose, and then apply for a grant, because then it shows that your commitment, your level of commitment. But yes, yeah, unfortunately, it's pretty hard to get one if you're startup nonprofit. Um, so what do you suggest or recommend for people trying to use a grant for startup cost? Oh, maybe this is the same question. That and then towards the business. Oh, okay. I think I understand what you're saying. Okay. So what do I suggest, recommend for people trying to just trying to get a grant for startup cost, because you're just setting up the LLC, but you haven't done anything towards the business. Yes. So, this is funny question because back before, just a little bit after COVID had ended and they started opening up, there were some grants that are available, even if you were just starting out. But unfortunately, the same thing with nonprofits is I don't see grants for very, very early startups, as in like there's no activity yet. Yes, I don't see this. So that's why it's a little bit difficult if you're a startup because they want to see at least like 1 or 2 years activity just to make sure that you are actually sincere in your mission or your business. But good question, because I'm sure that's on many people's minds, and I get that question quite a bit. Okay. So I'm gonna see if there's any other questions that I've missed. Um, okay. So I don't think I've missed any, but if you don't have any other questions, what I would suggest is, and if you think of any questions later on, please feel free to email me or leave me a text or call me. And then just see, so just to give you a recap, what I do is that I work at Pace, and what and I do technical consulting, one-on-one consulting. So and that could entail if you want to do applications like grant applications. So we do that. I can help you review it. And then also for those of you who are more advanced in your business and looking into procurement opportunities or working with the government, that's really my specialty as well. I can help you look for bids and then review your proposals as well. So with that said, okay, that is what do you recommend? What do I recommend for a startup? Are you talking about if you're looking for funding? Um, I actually have another class on funding. So there are different kinds of funding. It's also debt and equity, right? I would suggest that if you are looking for funding for a startup, it's really like there's some microloans that you can get, depending on what you're looking for, right? And then depending on how much. So there are some microloans, for example, that Pace offers, and it could be as low as I think 2,500 for the microloans. And then also I would suggest because I'm not going to say 100% that there are no grants for startups. I just say that right now, at this moment in time, it's kind of hard to come by. But I would suggest even just doing your research and seeing if there are any out there that are still available. Okay, and are there any specific grants for women-owned businesses? Yes, there are. I'll show you the list, and then retail. Yes, there were some for depending on the retail that you have, but that's your store. But let's say it's food retail. I think there were some that were for food businesses. But at one point, there was one on Etsy, Amazon, and then also eBay. But these grants are yearly. So even if they close now, next year they may be open. And then are grants available for nonprofits for startup or growth costs? Yeah, unfortunately, our microloans are only for businesses for nonprofit for profits. But yes, if you have a nonprofit though, please, yeah, reach out to me because I also have a network of people that do grant writing as well. So more on the nonprofit side. But thank you so much. Hopefully I answered all your questions. And if I didn't, please feel free to reach back out to me. Let me see if let me check what is just. Yes, okay. Yes, I think most of your questions are for startups. But if you have any others, anything a bit more specific, you need clarifications or just need my assistance in general, just yes, absolutely. Please feel free to reach out to me. With that said, thank you so much. I appreciate your time as always. And but yeah, have a good